right back to where this all started, Chanel. You asked women in an online poll to report on their sexual assault experiences, specifically assaults endured from men and boys who attended all-male schools. So take us back to where that started and tell us how it all unfolded.
Yeah, so the campaign was kind of like, do you want to know basically why I started the campaign, or is in
Yes, tell me like what headspace you were in when you wrote that post.
so for context, about almost a whole year before I actually posted on Instagram was when I decided that like I thought I was going to do something about this. Um, I was away with friends and basically we just had like endless stories of sexual assaults that boys we knew had perpetrated against girls we knew. And then in that conversation, I told my story of sexual assault, and the boy who did it to me, turns out had also done it to a friend of mine a year later. And like that for me was just this moment of being, I mean, in classic, girl behavior, thinking like, oh, it's fine when it happens to me, but I don't want it to happen to someone else. And then got really, really emotional about the fact that I feel as though I could have prevented it happening to my friend if I had fully understand what was going on or reported him or held him accountable in some way, but I didn't. And now I guess my mindset is, well, maybe if he knew what consent was and how important it was and that it was a thing that him and his friends should value, maybe he wouldn't have done it to me. So that kind of started, and then I like messaged a few friends, got some testimonies just sent to me privately, like girls who I knew had been sexually assaulted who had told me about these things before, and just said like, hey, would you be willing to do this? My plan was to just print out like 20, 30 testimonies and kind of hand them to the schools that we went to, because the context of this as well was that the way I grew up in Sydney's eastern suburbs, and the private school scene there, it's very much like everyone knows each other, and like, I don't know, I feel like as though sexual assault is really common in these spaces. And if we're looking at it from an education lens, these education institutions are some of the most well-resourced like education institutions in the world. So it just seems like there's really no excuse to not be taught this material.
Were you expecting the outpouring though? Because I remember being sent around, I think it was a Google Doc or Excel spreadsheet with these testimonies on it. And it wasn't just the horrifying nature of the content and the way that women and girls were being abused by young men, but it was the scale of it that shocked me. Like, I am a sexual assault survivor, and you do have that experience as an individual and you think about it just as yourself, but when you see it on that scale, it's different.
Yeah, 100%. So then, yeah, we'll fast forward a year, and basically in a moment of like rage and anger, I posted on Instagram about this. And that's when I opened up a Google Doc. And it's so funny. I literally had a Google Doc because I thought like, oh, maybe like 10 or 20 people will submit it. And it was like literally crashing. Like there were so many people on it at once that you couldn't like load it properly. And like too many people were trying to edit it at the same time, adding to it. And then had to, quickly transitioned from a Google Doc to a Google form to a website. Yeah.
But in a way, I loved the simplicity of it, that it was just a Google Doc. Because if I think about when I was protesting at university about different things, we had to be there in person, like a rabble. But this was a kind of process that was just so simple in a way that it made it more powerful almost.
I think so. And I think the fact that it was so easy for people to get around this protest because all you need is a laptop or a phone. And it also, those stories were just, every single one of them was so genuine. Like you can read it, that none of them were, none of them were conventional or whatever. Everyone had their own voice, and thing that made the story feel so real to an individual person that I think it was quite hard to ignore that.
It really was. You mentioned there that you went from just talking to a few friends, the Instagram post, the Google Doc. What happened then? How did it turn into this big scale movement that you've got now?
It just snowballed so quickly. It got, I was getting testimonies like faster than I could physically read or post them. And yeah, when the website launched, the amount of signatures and the amount of testimonies submitted went up really high, because it also meant that it was fully anonymous for people, because whilst like the early days of the campaign, it was anonymous for the public, but people would have to send them to me specifically. So I think it meant that there were a lot more people who were willing to kind of be involved in this protest when they had the option of anonymity, which is another factor of like the online versus in person. And yeah, I was actually really funny. I watched one of my first media interviews the other day, because someone I was with wanted to see it, and I hadn't watched it. It was so funny. My voice is like so high pitched, and I'm so shy and timid and blah blah blah. And it's like on, I think it was on Sky News or The Project or something, and it was them talking about the campaign being like, it has 15,000 signatures. And it's so funny that, sorry, 1,500 signatures. And it's so funny that it went from that to 45,000, and it was still like on the news and like getting that sort of airtime then. So yeah, I think media had a big role to play in really taking it off and scaling it, and the launch of the website when it was accessible from everywhere in Australia.
I want to ask you what was the outcome, but I want to ask you in two parts, because you did something in a moment of time that has completely changed your life. It's changed the path of your life. What can you tell me about that?
Oh my god, my path of life has changed so much. It's all right. Yeah, so I mean, like, if we think about the day before I launched the petition, I was like a big time chiller uni student, like doing my master's, living in London. It was COVID lockdown, so spending a lot of time inside, like sleeping in, staying up late, whatever. And then just almost overnight, like I remember I didn't sleep for like 3 or 4 days after the petition started. And then suddenly for the next like 18 months basically, but especially the next year, and especially the next 6 months after that, my time schedule was like going, like working on Australian hours, being in the UK, not being able to get home because of COVID. So it was like getting up at ridiculously early times, going to bed at ridiculously late times, sleeping in the afternoon, and then like doing my master's somewhere like amongst that, I don't know where. So yeah, it was a massive life change, and it means that also now I get to work in gender equality and violence prevention and human rights and that sort of thing, which is something that I've always wanted to do. I just didn't really think I could do it.
Congratulations, because I feel as an old and crusty feminist, I need to say how proud I am of you for doing something so innovative and just getting this huge wave of support behind you. What do you think the outcome, Chanel, is in terms of policy and societal change? Because it's not just about getting people to write their testimonies down. It's actually about a change that you want to see, and that we all want to see, actually.
Yeah, so we've had some big policy outcomes. The biggest one is the fact that consent education is now mandatory from kindergarten until year 10 every single year in every single Australian school, which is
amazing. Yeah, I'm so proud. I mean, I've got daughters, right? I've got a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, and that makes me feel so good. Well done.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting, like such a testament, like how quickly that all happened, and the fact that it happened so dramatically. And the thing is with that also, so one of the like minister's advisors who I worked with really closely through the whole campaign, when the legislation officially passed, when the policy officially passed through, he sent me a text like congratulating me, and then was like, it wasn't even controversial by the time it passed, and that's testament to real cultural change. And that like really stuck out to me, because I was like, yeah, like a year ago when we're all signing this petition asking for holistic and early consent education for Australian school children, there were lots of people being like, oh, what do you want about, like the school system's so overrun, like blah blah blah, blah. And then it passed, and it was just like, yeah, we agree this is a good idea, because we've had this cultural conversation and change in Australia that's brought the like issues of consent and stuff to the attention of people.
And as someone that collects stories myself, I often think that when you're collecting these traumatic stories, you have a responsibility to do something with those stories. And it's quite incredible that all those women that told you those stories did it for something. It's had a concrete outcome. Their stories together have carried this incredible weight.
Yeah. It's amazing, like tangible benefit from the yeah, the action, and I don't know what to call it. It's almost generosity, I guess, of these people to like be willing to put the most intimate parts of their life on a public forum for the benefit of the greater good and for the future. And it's so nice that that's, yeah, fully paid off. And then also in terms of, so that was like the main ask of the campaign, but I think the kind of media discourse and like conversations, especially, you know, interacting with, you know, Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins and all of that last year, meant that, you know, we've had affirmative consent laws being rolled out, like I think a lot quicker than they would have been before, which is great across the country. We have, you know, we're currently working on campaigns to get stealthing criminalized, and like all of these topics that revolve around ultimately consent or lack thereof are getting so much more attention. I think it is because those testimonies are all still up there and you can still look at them, and it means that the impact that that has will carry on, I think.
Reflecting on that now, Chanel, why do you think your style of protest got the results it got?
I think two things. I think one, the human nature of it, the fact that, you know, you read a testimony and every single one has its own personality, and you can just almost like imagine like this person. But at the same time, and completely contradictory to what I just said, it was anonymous. So what that did was that meant two things. One, victims or survivors felt as though, you know, safe to lend their voice to this, and when maybe they wouldn't feel safe to do so if they had to be personally identified in the situation. And two, there was no real, this is a weird one, I don't know how to explain it, but I've thought about it a lot. I think the fact that no individual perpetrator at any point got any blame helped carry this campaign. There was no individual finger pointing. It was very much, this is a structural, this is an everyone, this is an all-encompassing issue. Like, this is a rape culture. And maybe you've never sexually assaulted someone yourself, but you've been a bystander to rape culture, you've been a bystander to comments, or, you know, your friend who's done something and you're still mates with them, and like all those sort of things. And I think it gave people the space to step back and reflect without feeling, you know, I'm putting it in quotation marks, but personally victimized as a perpetrator, being called out in that way. And it also like didn't kind of allow that media sensation that so often happens. Like, I remember I was so careful telling my individual story, not because like I'm not at all ashamed or embarrassed or whatever about it, but I was like, this is not about me. It's not about the fact it happened to me. It's about the fact that it happened to most women I know and most of the people I grew up with. So keeping it, you know, there's this quote that I really like, and it's like, be ruthless with structures and kind with people. And I feel like that's what the campaign did, which is why it had such an impact. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, if you want to change behavior of perpetrators, you have to bring perpetrators with you.
Yeah.
In
exactly.
some way. I mean, that's a really uncomfortable thing to think about sometimes, because individuals want to direct their anger somewhere. But the fact is, it's human beings that are doing this behavior, and we have to ask them to change. We have to communicate in a way that they will accept in order to change their behavior. It's a really interesting thing to think about. I've thought a lot about your protest in a sense of, yes, it was anonymous, but it is also very human. So while there might not have been names and faces attached to those stories, the humanity was still there. And the other interesting thing to me was that because of the internet, which can do so much harm, but in this instance, it made your protest accessible to anyone. And that was incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It was a powerful tool to use, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And also I think, so two things on that also. So while it was anonymous, for people who are listening who haven't seen the campaign or checked it out yet, it was semi-anonymous in that schools and school years were named for both the perpetrator and the victim, which made it very real, again, especially in contexts where, you know, lots of people like know each other and stuff like that, to think like, oh, this story comes from one of the 100 girls who were in my grade, and one of the 100 guys who are in the local boys' school who I spend all my time with were one of the ones who did that to her. So I think that also, gave the space, and the impact of social media and kind of like sharing, like, it basically went viral. It's basically what happened.
How do you think protest is changing, given what you've outlined just now?
I think social media changes protest massively. I think it's changed the scene. I think that, we've seen really tangible, really tangible things come out of social media campaigns. Even things like GoFundMe's and stuff like that can go crazy and lives can change overnight. I think what has changed is that I think maybe think like, I don't know, yeah, back 30 years ago or something like that. If you wanted to protest, you would have to take the time out of your day, go to a specific spot, be there in person, show up, and you would have to be then passionate enough about a topic that it's outweighing, your Sunday plans to go to the beach or whatever. Whereas now I think it's a lot easier to be a part of protests because you can sign a petition in 3 seconds. You can, like a post, share a post on Instagram. If you can't donate money to something, you can share it with your network. All these things can happen instantly, which means that people who, care about things can be involved. And also, like, I just used a bad example saying, oh, you have to show up for a protest instead of going to the beach, but also the amount of people who have to, work 2 jobs or have kids to look after, all those sort of things. It makes it more accessible, I think, now.
The flip side of that, though, Chanel, is that it's sometimes too easy to sign up to things. It's kind of what people call clicktivism, where you're just sitting in your armchair and you don't actually have to be that passionate about it to click on something. How would you respond to people who think that those online methods of protest might be lazy in some way?
I guess I'm biased because all the people who took 2 seconds to click on my thing, the 45,000 tangible results. But I think that, I'm trying to think of an example. Okay, I'm going to sound like bad here, but like I'm obviously extremely passionate about the environment, say, but like I spend all my time campaigning and working towards gender equality issues and blah, 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 blah. And like if I tried to even invest a tenth of that into like environmental stuff, my brain would just like explode. And I want to support people who are insanely passionate about the environment and do treat that the way I treat gender. And me taking 10 seconds to sign a petition, read a letter, add my name to the end of an open letter, like whatever it is, email my MP, I can do that without it depleting from what I need to do in my life. And I just don't think that I need to have like the most like dying, burning passion in the world in order for me to still say that I want something as a citizen. So I don't think that we need to require people to like put in full hard yards as just like normal citizens to ask powerful people to change things. I think that it should just be like masses saying like, this is something we want.
It's interesting too, because I've thought a lot in my work on cyber hate about the internet as a tool and the nature of the tool. And when it comes to something like sexual assault or sexual harassment, it's actually easier and more comfortable to report that stuff online than even telling a counselor face to face. And I wonder how much that contributed to the response that you had, that in fact, the anonymity was in your favor online.
100% in this topic. We have such a taboo around sexual violence. And yeah, that's a really good point, as in there's no taboo around being someone who's passionate about helping the environment, because it's like, there's no taboo around that. But if someone is really passionate about sexual violence, of course, you can have not been a victim or survivor and still be really passionate about it. But a lot of the time, and also the fact that most women have experienced this in some way, shape, or form, it's personal. And even saying, to your family, to your friends, like, oh, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm going to a protest in town hall and it's on this. It signals, I don't know, things that you may not be comfortable sharing about yourself potentially. So I think the anonymity of it is a massive factor, especially when like testimonies of sexual assault are being relayed.
And also, you don't necessarily, when you're reporting online, need to deal with other people's responses. So if you're telling someone face to face, it's very awkward. Often it's a very difficult topic to broach. But like I know I myself, when Brittany and Grace were talking out about sexual assault, I was writing about being sexually assaulted on Twitter way before I had ever told any friends or family, because I just didn't feel comfortable having the face-to-face conversation. But it was somehow easier to tell the world online about it. It's really interesting, isn't it?
100%. And also so many people who submitted testimonies to teachersconsent.com told me how like cathartic that was for them.
Yeah.
Because it's something they had never said out loud. Like or how to like to go into as much detail as they wanted in that space. And a lot of people said they wrote more and then cut it down and press submit on a condensed version. But that process, I think, gave space to people and meant that it could be done in a safe space in their own time.
And very much on your own terms, as opposed to if you were telling a counselor or a friend or a relative or something. If you could wave a magic wand and your work was done, we were done here, what would that look like?
Oh, that's such a hard question. I think that would look like the abolishment of rape culture. So when I talk about rape culture, I'm talking about normalized violence. I'm talking about attitudes and beliefs about gender and sexuality and how those things relate to each other that create a situation where sexual assault and harassment is a widespread and common experience for women, children, and also many men. And I think the stuff I see sexual violence, I see perpetrators very much on like a spectrum for the reason of their perpetration. There are kind of, there are people in the world who are sadistic, who purposely want to hurt others, who maybe, kidnap, kill, those sort of things. I don't know. I don't think my work's ever going to change those people. And I don't know if we ever can fix that. If they get consent education, that's not going to change their mind about kidnapping someone, because our society knows that that's the thing that you shouldn't be doing. However, like the vast majority of sexual violence is perpetrated on the spectrum of like basically male sexual entitlement over empathy. And that's what I really think we can change in this space. And that's where my focus is on, is this type of sexual violence that is often perpetrated, I don't know if you want to call it accidentally or because these boys are being products of their own environment, rather than intently malicious in their act. And if I could wave a magic wand, I would abolish the culture that has normalized sexual violence, because what happened to me, what happened to so many people until and still now, but a massive thing I heard back from teachersconsent.com like campaign was that I didn't know what happened to me was wrong or a crime until I got older, because it was normalized to me. It felt wrong. It made me upset. I cried the next day. I got angry at him, whatever. But I had no idea it was a crime. I had no idea I'd just been raped. I had no idea any of these things happened, because I didn't know that, one, I didn't know that, someone you knew and trusted could do something like rape you. I thought that was that kind of like stereotype of like person who's going to kidnap you and hurt you. And two, I didn't realize that, sexual violence can occur without physical pain being inflicted or all those sort of things. And most importantly, the fact that when I, told these sort of like, if I did tell my friends what happened, like the few friends I did tell, like when I thought about this stuff, it was stories that I'd heard it happened to other people. So I just thought that was part of being 13 and, what it was like if you were dating an older guy, like that's just what happened kind of thing. And so the normalized violence is what I would abolish if I had a wand.
And you said a few times empathy. To me, that's so important. I remember when the Prime Minister was saying he had to think about what had happened to Brittany Higgins, and he only understood it as being wrong when he thought about his daughters. And I was like, wow, like is it such a stretch to think of women as human beings? Like it really takes a long thought process for some men to think of women as human beings. It's incredible that that's just something that exists in our culture, that the culture is such that men feel so entitled that women are not human beings. It's amazing. I find that amazing to think about. But that's a really important change in terms of how men look at women.
I also think like this is just like completely my own thoughts. I have no like thing to back this, but I just feels like it's almost getting worse in that sense, because I think pornography is such a driving factor in that entitlement over women's bodies and the objectification of women and like reducing women to below human status. And I guess that's another good answer for magic wand wave. Like if I could wave my wand and everyone in Australia, everyone in the world or whatever, had empathy, just actual amounts of empathy for marginalized groups. And I guess in this topic, if we're talking about, women and children, I don't think much sexual violence will happen, because I do think the crux of it is when entitlement outweighs that, which is happening far too often with driving factors like pornography, with driving factors like the private school scene, which I spoke about so much at the beginning of the petition, and all that sort of thing.
But that's a taught skill as well. Little girls are often taught empathy. They're often taught to look after other people, and little boys are not necessarily. So it's interesting how early it starts. That's a whole other conversation about pornography, isn't it? We'd be here all day if we started on that. If school kids, boys, girls, are watching and listening, and they may have experienced sexual assault, sexual harassment, or they just want to be a good ally, what would you say to them?
I think if you've experienced it, know that you're not alone and know your options. So, think about whether you want to report or not report. I encourage you to tell someone, whether that be a parent or a friend, keeping in mind, and this may be a controversial thing to say, but I feel bad. A lot of students often tell teachers at school and don't realize that instant duty of care means that police need to be informed straight away. So just to keep options open for people, know that school as first point of contact may or may not be a good option for you, depending what you want and depending what your family and friend situation is like. If you are someone who is listening to this and thinking like, oh, I've done something bad in my life, maybe I'm in hindsight thinking about me perpetrating sexual violence, take the moment to reflect and acknowledge that, and think about how you're going to do better and how you're going to move forward knowing that, and how you're going to enact the rest of your life making sure that you never do that again. And if you want to be a good ally to these sort of people, just, I think, always being conscious that there's always a chance, and when you're in a group of multiple people, there's a very high chance that you're with someone who's either been a victim of sexual violence or abuse, or who is a perpetrator of sexual violence and abuse. So thinking about the language that you're using around those people. Are you laughing at rape victims? Are you using rape as a punchline to a joke? Are you then sending a signal to people who are victims that this is something they should be ashamed of, or it doesn't matter, or isn't a big deal? And are you sending a message to the people who perpetrate this sort of thing that it's okay to do? So yeah, just being conscious, I guess, of, again, the real crux of this is the normalized nature of it. So taking the time to think about what's normal, what that has resulted in for lots of people, and how we're meant to move forward from that.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Ginger. It was lovely to speak to you.
Subscribe to our channel for more seriously interesting videos.